Our speaker this hour is Brother Gary Dull. Gary graduated from the Tri-City School of Preaching in 2012. Gary mainly works in the mission field, and I'm sure he'll probably mention some of that while he's up here. But his topic this evening is Provide for Honest Things. Brother Gary, come speak to us.
It's really a privilege to come before you again. It's been a while since I've been in this pulpit. Oh yeah, by the way, my wife said to tell you, this is going to be a hot lesson. It is really special to be in this pulpit because this is where it started for me. Of course, everybody probably knows it. Brother Eddie Kraft talked me into coming. But I want to just reminisce just a minute or two. There's some things that have not changed. One being the squeak in the pulpit. It's always been there as long as I can vouch for. Another thing is the oneness and the solidarity of the men that teach in this program. I'm forever grateful to them. What would happen? What would you do if the bank that you were doing business with lost your money? Couldn't get it back. It was gone. If you were in that situation, would you not be upset and want to change? You'd want to change your bank. You would lose faith in that bank. You know, there's a Chinese proverb. It says, when one is in a field, a large field of melons, you don't stoop to tie one's shoe, because it will look like you are waiting to steal a melon. This morning, or this evening, we're going to be talking about the verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, in verse 21. And it reads, providing for honest things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. Men of integrity. Have you ever thought about this? Men of integrity, this day and time, are hard to come across. When I was growing up, all you had to do was to seal a deal. In fact, the first deal that I ever made when I was working was a shake of a hand. And I proceeded to do the deal. At one time, a man's word was his bond. I want to interject this. This past week, my brother-in-law decided not to fly as a crop duster. And he, by accident, it was an accident, he was in a new airplane and he messed up the propeller. And you know, he drove from New Bern, North Carolina, to Arkansas changed the propeller, got a new one, or a loaner, really. And within 24 hours, he was back in New Bern, North Carolina, with the man's propeller. That's integrity. He was brought up that way. That's integrity. Well, I'm going to talk to you today about what it takes to be a man of God and a man of integrity. It's very important that a man commands the respect by his demeanor and therefore his reputation. Did you know? Think about it. What are you going to take to heaven? Your reputation. That's the only thing you're going to take to heaven. It's very important to have an honest report when it comes to the handling of money or goods, especially when it has to do, when it's put in your care, and when it has to do with the church. You've got to be able to administer in a proper way. And not only in this proper way, you need to be able to distribute it in a proper way. Let's just take a look. Look at this honest face down here in this yellow coat. Have you ever thought about how much Eddie and Wesley have to deal with money? Money. In order to run this school. People give their money, their hard-earned money, so this school can exist. And these men, along with the elders here, have to be above board. They have to be. What would be the consequences? It'd be just like that bank. The consequences would be that the school would probably fold. That's the consequences of not being above board. Well, Paul talks about this. He talks about this in this one little verse. 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 21. Providing for things honest. I know sometimes that students, especially sometimes in day-to-day life, in this school, in other schools, they may not think about the things that people's money helps them do. But we're not only talking about money, we're talking about time. We're talking about studying. All of these things. Paul also ran his life this way. When you think about it, Paul was running his life in the way that Christ wanted to do it. You know, Paul wanted to be so much like Christ, even to the point of his the things that happened to him. He put his life on the line for Christ. Christians are to be above board. Paul wrote this to the Philippians. He said, after he had explained the reason for his mindset, the way he was thinking. He said this in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are good of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. Think on them. You know, the Christian religion is a religion that has to be thought about, has to be done in order to exist. We have to put our mind to the Christian religion. It doesn't just happen. As many denominations feel that that's how it is. It just happens. The Christian religion is a religion that we have to make sure that we are on the right course. We're going to talk about three things today. First off, we're going to talk about that it is a work that requires the highest order of Christian men. This work of being, providing honest things. Second of all, we are going to talk about that it is a work deserving the gratitude of all. And thirdly, we're going to talk about it is a work exposed to the suspicions of worldly men. It's a work that requires the highest order of Christian men. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 16 says, "But thanks be to God, which put the same earnest care into the heart of Titus for you." And in Titus chapter 1, verse 15, Paul tells Titus, "Unto the pure, all things are pure. But unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure. But even their mind and their conscience is defiled." So, being a follower of Christ means that we need to be above board. Solomon, one of the greatest minds of the world, gift given by God, he says this in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. He says, "My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For the length of days and long life and peace shall they add unto thee. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Bind them about thy neck, but write them on your heart." You know, the Jews in the Old Testament, the Old Law, they were to take these laws, they were to write them on the fence post. They were to write them in their hearts. They were to write them virtually everywhere so they wouldn't forget them. We've got to God's laws in our hearts. The reason why is in the last verse, so shall thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God. But not only in the sight of God, in the sight of man. You see, sometimes we think that, we preach to ourselves here, abroad. We think that we're talking to fellow Christians. One, you never know when there's a non-Christian in the audience. But we still need to be above board. Be honest. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 12. Peter talked to the dispersion. Now, the dispersion being all the Christians in the world that was known at that time. He says this in verse 12, having your conversation honest among the Gentiles. You notice here, he's not talking that much about Christians right now. He's saying being honest among the Gentiles. Because that, whereas they speak against you as evildoers. Oh, wow! Christians? Evildoers? Man. When I was in Fiji, there is a folklore about one of the first missionaries. He was Methodist, but one of the first missionaries that went to the Fiji Islands. And he stayed there for several years. But finally he made the natives mad. And they boiled him and eat his shoes. We can make people mad. We can do that. But we need to do it with a pure heart. They may be your good works, which they shall behold. Glorify God. Glorify God. In the day of the visitation, glorify God. We've heard from this pulpit today about glorifying God. We've heard about the things that need to be done to glorify God. That's our ultimate goal, is to glorify God. Peter told those of the dispersion that they should go do good works to all that is what, and that is what will glorify God. They need to do the good works in order to glorify God. Now, it is a work that requires the honest or the highest order of a Christian. This glorifying God is done by men with integrity. And that can be any Christian. Deal with people outside of this building with integrity. In Philippians chapter 4 and verse 5, it says this, "Let your moderation be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand." Well, it means that the Lord is looking. To say it, sort of paraphrase it, the Lord's looking. The word moderation, that's your moderation. That don't mean pull back on the throttle a little bit. That means your integrity. How you look at the world. How you look at yourself. Being of integrity. You know, this work of providing for honest things, it's a work deserving the gratitude of all. Men such as Paul and Titus and Timothy, those men worked for the Lord. They worked daily. They worked fervently. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 16. Paul says this. He says, "But thanks be to God, which put the same earnest care into the heart of Titus for you." Okay, Titus was there, and he was being very attentive to the needs of the Corinthian church. And he was also put in charge of their substance. Titus chapter 1 and verse 15, it says, "Unto the pure, all things are pure." You see, Titus had a pure heart. And he was willing and able to manage God's bounty. Solomon also wrote, Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 4, about the length of days. The length of days and a long life. A person that is trying to do God's will, he is doing a work that deserves the gratitude of everyone around him. Sometimes there's not enough that goes around. In Romans chapter 14 and verse 20, Romans chapter 14 and verse 20. "For meat destroy not the work of God. All things indeed are pure, but it is evil for that man who eateth in offense." See, we can't offend others. It's not prudent. It's not God's will. Now, sometimes we think that we're right. Sometimes people demand that they're right. But you know, that's not the principle that Paul's talking about. He's saying that if it offends somebody, we're not to do it. We're not to do it. Find some other way. If it be in correcting or admonishing, find some other way to do it. Romans chapter 12, and verse 17. Paul writes this: recompense no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. Recompense no man evil for evil. We are to be above board in all our dealings with the world, so there will never, never, never be a time in which the reproach is brought upon the church of the living God. When it is brought upon ourselves, being members of the body of Christ, the reproach is brought upon the church. Those are some things that we need to think about. We need to be above board. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 15, it says, "For all things are for your sakes, that the abundant grace might through the thanksgiving of many rebound to the glory of God." The thanksgiving of many. How do we think that we'll be able to approach the throne of God with on our lips we say, "But I didn't know. But you should have known." Okay, this is what it's all about. The whole thing. Because we act as we should as Christians. Okay, because we act as we should as Christians. This is not just for ourselves, you see, but also through us, God is glorified. We see Jesus. Therefore, they want to follow Christ, these people that we are trying to influence. And believe me, in this world today, in this country, it's very hard to influence people in the way of the Lord. It's not impossible, but it's hard. We want to influence people in order that they may want to follow Christ. That they may want to follow Christ. You're not going to influence somebody to make them follow Christ. In a short period of time, they will probably fall away. You've got to make them want to follow Christ. Many different ways of doing that. Many. Christ, to follow Christ and to serve Him. And when all of this happens, God's glorified. Finally, I may be shorter than Eddie, but we're going to take one more stab at this. It's a work. It's a work exposed to the suspicions of worldly and righteous people. In Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, it says, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report. If there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Things of good report. The eyes of men are always on you. Always. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 17, it says, "Recompense no man evil for evil, but provide things honest in the sight of all men." Provide things honest. You know, the apostle seems to have been almost afraid of carrying the contribution to Jerusalem, because it was so much responsibility in order to do this. Things could happen. The benefits of the contribution of the church would on occasion be subject to things that could happen. And Paul didn't want this to happen, not on his watch. And he made sure that it didn't. He did this so that he could guard against the possibilities that he gets the churches to choose from amongst themselves some men of the best reputation. He wanted this to happen. Whom he calls the messengers of the church. And Titus and perhaps Luke, in the administration of this charity, they did that. Providing for things honest. Not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. Dishonest men have existed throughout time, in all ages. And the more dishonest they are, the more suspicious they are. Paul here guards against all the scandalous things that could have happened. He makes sure that they don't happen. He had a great respect for his own reputation. So much so that one at a time, in the readings of these epistles, we are astonished that a man so great in nature and great in character would think so much about the opinions of others. But he did, because he was above board. When it comes to dealings of any kind, we should be honest with who we have these dealings with. When it comes to the money that has been put into our care on the behalf of the church, we have not only given, that these people have not only given with their hearts, it is our duty as Christians to handle it and use it in a way that they would see fit and honest. If this is not done, if we cannot be above board, we bring reproach on ourselves and on the church. So we see providing for things honest. You know, it's a hard work. It's a work that requires the honest men and also the highest order of Christianity. Because you're handling other people's stuff. It is a work deserving of the gratitude of all. And it's also a work exposed to the suspicions of worldly men. I ask you to be one of these men. To have a good report in and out of the church, wherever you're needed.